can try and win championships, and that's what it's all about. When you look from the outside and you watch this team, I know we're going to have a real good, solid hockey team this year.
Welcome back to Fireside Rangers. I'm your host, Anthony Rivardo, joined by my co-host, Eric Wilson. And today we have an interesting trade rumor discussion to be had. Of course, we know that the New York Rangers are in need of a second-line center. They're going to be trying to acquire one this offseason. Most of the time when you hear this discussion, you hear Andrew Kopp and Ryan Strome. Those are the two that get discussed. Should the Rangers re-sign Kopp? Should they re-sign Strome? Who will be the second-line center of those two guys? But what if those two ask for too much money? They're too expensive and the Rangers cannot afford them. Well, then they can try and look for some trade partners. And there is a player who's on the trade block, JT Miller. The Vancouver Canucks have reportedly been listening to offers, and they've made teams aware that they are willing to listen to those offers and willing to trade JT Miller, a player who had some trade rumors at the trade deadline this past season. Didn't get traded, but now in the offseason could potentially be moved for the right price. And it's something to take note of for the Rangers. Of course, JT Miller, a former New York Ranger himself, could make a lot of sense as a second line center for the Rangers. So, Eric, how are you doing today? And what are your thoughts on potentially trading for JT Miller?
JT Miller is an interesting name for me. I was a big fan of him back when he played with the Rangers all those years ago. And I was at the very start of his career. He was a young player for us, and he was still pretty good. And we shipped him off, and he's gotten better. He's currently in the prime of his career. Scored 99 points this past season, and his contract's extremely cheap right now with 1 year left. So I think if we really think we can push to win the Cup next season, reacquiring him and throwing him on the second line as our center would be a great option.
Yeah, for sure. And there's a quote here from a report talking about what it would take to acquire JT Miller. Quote, the Canucks are interested in listening, but JM Patrick Alvin, I'm sure, is very busy, but the Canucks aren't just in the market for draft picks. They need good young players, NHL players in return. It's going to be a very interesting offseason in Vancouver, end quote. So that's a really important part of this discussion to take note of. It's not just trading some picks away from your future in order to acquire JT Miller. The Canucks really want some talent in return for JT Miller. They want some good players. So, Eric, what is your reaction to that quote right there? Kind of just reacting to, not only giving up draft picks to get this talented player in JT Miller, but also having to sacrifice some of the talent on the Rangers' current roster.
I would be okay with giving away a couple of roster players, depending on who they were. If there's one thing that the Rangers have an abundance of, it's good young prospects. We're like the youngest team in the league right now. And we have extra young defensemen who don't really have a spot in our lineup, a couple of younger forwards. So it really just depends on which names got thrown into that trade mix. But overall, I'd be okay with giving away a couple players for a player like JT Miller.
Yeah, and when you take a look at Andrew Kopp and Ryan Strome, really the two other main candidates to be the second line center for the Rangers, there is a potential for those two players to each be looking at 5-year deals around $6 million average annual value. And when you're looking at $6 million average annual value, plus you're taking a look at 2023-24, when the Rangers need to re-sign Lafreniere, Keandre Miller, Filipino, it's kind of tough to see, if Strome and Copper really do request that type of money. It's hard to see a scenario where the Rangers can fit all of that underneath the salary cap. And that's where the door gets opened up for JT Miller. But with JT Miller, this would be a one-and-done type deal. You would be trading for him, getting him for the 2022 season, and making a push for the Stanley Cup. Of course, we know that the Rangers are already close. It's a young team. It's a very talented team, but they did just make it to Game 6 of the Eastern Conference Finals against the reigning world champ, Tampa Bay Lightning. So it's kind of one of those situations where, do you believe you are one player away, one really good second-line center away? And what is your thought on that, Eric? Are the Rangers one good second line center away from pushing into the Stanley Cup Finals?
Yeah, there's a couple things we got to do to really make that final push to the finals, but the second line center is easily the biggest thing that we lack in. Ryan Strome hasn't been doing it. We know this by now. JT Miller, a 99-point scorer on our second line, playing with another phenomenal player such as Panarin and hopefully Frank Vetrano. I think that just makes our top six the most elite in the entire NHL at this point. JT Miller is a great player, great goal scorer. He's a great passer. And I think he'd fit right in with Panarin on that second line, and it'd be very productive. I think that is exactly what it would take to help elevate us to that level to win the Stanley Cup.
Yeah, absolutely. And he has an affordable $5.25 million cap hit for the 2022 season. But there is speculation that his next deal will be really large at about $8.5 million average annual value for at least 5 years. So again, it would be a one and done trade. This is
Mhm.
basically a scenario where the Rangers are swinging for the fences. They're trying to hit a home run and win the cup next year if they're trading for JT Miller. And again, 5.25 million cap hit is pretty affordable. Plus, it's a trade. You could negotiate with the Canucks and potentially have them take on half of the cap hit themselves, which would make things even more affordable for the Rangers. But they also do have to sacrifice some players, as we mentioned earlier. So, Eric, who are some players that you would be willing to part with in a potential trade? I know you read some articles about this topic. You see names like Capo Caco, and a couple other players that could come to mind. So, Eric, who are you thinking could be in this trade package if the Rangers decide to make a move for JT Miller?
The biggest name that I would put out there is Nils Lundqvist, defensive prospect that we have. Um, we have a lot of young defensemen out there that have a lot of high potential. Not all of them are going to be able to fit onto this lineup that we have with the amazing defensive core that we have. So getting rid of someone like him wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. That's something that the Canucks do lack in and would hopefully be interested in taking. And you also throw a name out there like Capo Caco. I'm not entirely sure if I'd be willing to part ways with him for a JT Miller trade because, as you said, this would be a one and done type deal, and it's cup or bust. We either acquire Miller, win the cup, lose Caco, and it's worth it because we brought the cup home. But if we acquire Miller, he's not that good, and then we get eliminated right away, and then he walks, then we just let our second overall pick, Capo Caco, leave for nothing. So it's definitely a big risk to take. Hopefully, the deal would have to be pretty good for us in order for me to be willing to get rid of Kako. But a couple of these young defensive guys, maybe even throw in a first round pick. They said they aren't looking for picks, but it will always help if you try to throw some in the mix there. So yeah, definitely just some young defensive prospects and maybe someone like Philip Hedel, just another young guy. But that's definitely what it would take.
Yeah, and they're not looking for picks necessarily, but picks are going to be involved in any trade. But you do have to keep in mind the Rangers don't have a 2022 first round pick. They traded that away to get Andrew Kopp at the trade deadline. So if they are to include a first round pick in this trade package, it would be a 2023 first round pick. So that would mean back to back years where the Rangers do not have a first round pick. And that's also another interesting thing to take note of because, again, we're mentioning it's cup or bust. You're trading for JT Miller and basically loaning him out for 1 year, paying him to play for the team for 1 year, and then expecting that he's going to leave. But you're doing that, and you're also sacrificing a first-round pick next year. So a portion of your future for the present. And that's kind of something to debate, right? I'm curious to see comment sections down below on the YouTube video. Is that worth it? Giving up a first-round pick next year and potentially a young player like Capo Caco or Filipino? Because with these young players, yes, the Rangers are ready to win right now. And maybe making this trade gives them the final piece that they need to get to the Stanley Cup Finals. But you're also sacrificing some talent over the course of the next few seasons. And especially if you're talking about trading away Capo Caco or Filipino and the first round pick, well, then you're talking about trading away a significant portion of your future with two young players potentially and a first round pick. It's very much a win now mentality if you make this trade, if you're the Rangers. I see the pros and cons to it personally. But Eric, who are you thinking like could be a different second line center potentially if Andrew Kopp or Ryan Strome don't work out? JT Miller, this trade is too expensive for you. Do you think that the Rangers try and pay up elsewhere, or maybe just kind of cool off here and focus on signing Frank Vetrano?
That's a tough one because obviously the second line center, like I said, is the biggest thing that we need to take care of this offseason. Um, in a perfect world, Andrew Kopp will just take a cheap deal and stay with us. I don't want Strom. We know this. I'm not going any farther into that. And if JT Miller doesn't work out, they definitely need to test the market elsewhere. There's a couple names out there. I believe Vinny Churchek is one of the big names out there who's on the trade block. So going for him would be another expensive option. But definitely the biggest thing right now is just managing our money and making sure that whoever we get is cheap, affordable, and the most productive option out there.
Absolutely. And kind of tying back what I said earlier about potentially having the Canucks take on 50% of the cap hit, that could open an opportunity to get JT Miller and also re sign Frank Vetrano. And that could be really interesting to take note of. But you'd be talking about a package of Capo Caco and maybe not a first-round pick. Maybe you find another talented player on the roster, 2 players for 1. There's a potential for that as well. But again, you're going to be giving up a young player in Capo Caco who has unlimited potential. Now, I know we just made an episode recently talking about what should the Rangers do with Capo Caco. Should they trade him? Should they move on? He's a restricted free agent this offseason. So it's going to be something really interesting with the Rangers deciding what they're going to do. And his future is quite murky because, no, he hasn't necessarily lived up to the expectations of the 2nd overall pick, and he was a healthy scratch in Game 6 of the Eastern Conference Finals. So do you think maybe the Rangers are willing to move on from Capo Caco, and they'd be more than willing to throw him into a trade to acquire JT Miller?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Jordan Gallant has said that he does see Capo Caco being a top 6 center for the New York Rangers this upcoming season. But I also still think that the Rangers organization will be open to hearing offers. I don't know if they're more so like pushing to trade him away, is like actively looking for trades. But I believe that if a trade comes to the table, they would be willing to consider throwing him in if it's for the right price and we get something of good value in return.
And JT Miller would be of good value in return, at least for 1 year. And that's kind of the main thing here with this discussion. But we were both in agreement when we discussed Capo Caco in that episode that the Rangers should be re-signing Capo Caco. We see him as a valuable piece for the future and a talented player that the Rangers should make it a priority to re-sign. But of course, we also want to see the Rangers hoist up a Stanley Cup, and JT Miller could give them a prime opportunity to do so in the 2022 season. So that really wraps up this conversation. We've gone over most of the pros and cons here. So I'm curious to hear from all of you down in the comment section below on YouTube. What do you think of this potential scenario for the Rangers? Should they try and make a trade for JT Miller? Is this something you guys like? Is this something you guys dislike? And what would you be willing to give up and sacrifice in order to acquire JT Miller and make that 2022 Stanley Cup Finals push? That's going to be the question down in the comment section below. Let us know. Make sure to leave a like if you did enjoy this video. Subscribe if you're new to the channel. Ring the bell so you don't miss a video, and we'll catch you all on the next one. Have a good one, and let's go Rangers.
Let's go Rangers. And also, let's go Avalanche tonight. Win that cup.
He shoots. He's